Sarah had always dreamed of becoming a mother. Since she was a little girl, she imagined herself surrounded by children, hearing their laughter, holding them close, and guiding them as they grew. She pictured herself as the kind of mother who would always be there for her kids no matter what. But life, it seemed, had other plans for her. She met Daniel when she was in her late 20s. He was kind, patient, and thoughtful. Their connection was immediate, and it didn't take long for them to fall in love. Daniel had always been open to starting a family, and Sarah, with her dream of motherhood still burning brightly in her heart, was overjoyed when they decided to marry. For Sarah, their wedding day was one of the happiest of her life. The church was filled with friends and family, and as she walked down the aisle, she felt like her dreams were finally beginning to come true. But little did she know, the road to motherhood would be far more difficult than she ever imagined. From the start, Sarah and Daniel tried to have children. They were eager and hopeful, believing that soon their home would be filled with the sounds of children's footsteps, cries, and laughter. But months turned into years, and despite their best efforts, no child came. Sarah began to feel a deep ache inside, something she could never fully explain to Daniel. She would watch other couples around her have children easily, and would find herself wondering, why not me? She often found herself lost in thought, looking at babies in strollers as they passed by or hearing the laughter of children playing in the park. Each day seemed to bring with it a little more disappointment. They visited doctors and tried countless treatments, but no matter what they did, Sarah's body refused to give them the one thing they longed for: children. The doctors were kind, but the news they offered was never what Sarah wanted to hear. After years of trying, Sarah was given a diagnosis that no woman ever wants to hear: infertility. The news hit her like a brick wall. She felt broken, like her body had betrayed her. Daniel, ever the supportive husband, comforted her through the dark days. He reminded her constantly that their love was enough. "We're in this together," he would say, holding her hand tightly. He never once blamed her, never showed any disappointment. His love for her remained as strong as ever, and that gave Sarah a sense of peace, but it didn't take away the sadness in her heart. She had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and now that dream felt farther away than ever before. Despite the heartache, Sarah never gave up on the idea of having a family. She knew there were other ways to become a mother. Adoption was always something she had considered, but it never felt like a real option. Adoption seemed like something distant, a possibility she had put on the back burner. But now, with the reality of her infertility settling in, Sarah began to think more seriously about it. One evening, as they sat together on the couch after a long day, Sarah brought it up to Daniel. "What do you think about adopting?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I mean, we could give a child a home, a family. I want to be a mother, and I think I could love a child no matter where they came from." Daniel looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. He had always wanted children, and he could see how much it meant to Sarah. "I think we should consider it," he said. "We have love to give, and there are so many children out there who need a family. Maybe we're meant to give one of them a home." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Daniel's support made all the difference. It wasn't the path she had imagined, but it was still a way to become a mother. They began researching adoption, looking into the different agencies, the processes, and the emotional journey they would need to take. It was overwhelming at times, but there was a sense of hope that slowly began to replace the sadness Sarah had felt for so long. As they moved forward with the adoption process, Sarah's excitement grew. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but the thought of finally having children in their home filled her with joy. It wasn't the easy road she had always imagined, but it was a road that promised love, hope, and the chance to finally fulfill her dream of motherhood. And then, just as they were beginning to feel optimistic about the future, they received an unexpected call that would change their lives forever. One afternoon, as Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table looking over some adoption paperwork, the phone rang. She picked it up, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But when the voice on the other end of the line spoke, her heart skipped a beat. "Hello, is this Sarah? I'm calling from the adoption agency. We've received a case that we think might be a good match for you and Daniel. There are 3 siblings, 2 boys and a girl, who are in need of a home. They recently lost their parents in a tragic accident. They're currently in a temporary shelter, and we were wondering if you and your husband would be interested in meeting them." Sarah's mind was spinning. 3 siblings. She hadn't expected this. Adoption had always seemed like something distant, but this felt real. Like fate had stepped in and was offering her a chance she couldn't pass up. She immediately called Daniel, her voice trembling as she told him about the call. He was just as shocked as she was, but they both knew that this could be the opportunity they had been waiting for. They agreed to meet the children, though neither of them knew what to expect. Sarah was nervous as they prepared to meet the children. She had never imagined becoming a mother to 3 kids at once, but something about the situation felt right. The idea of giving these 3 children a home, of offering them love and stability, was a chance she couldn't turn away from. The thought of becoming a mother to 3 orphans, each with their own grief and fears, filled her with a deep sense of responsibility. Sarah had always wanted to be a mother, but she had never anticipated the road to motherhood would be this difficult, this emotional. But she was ready. If they would accept her, she would open her heart to them, no matter how difficult the journey might be. And so, with a mixture of excitement, fear, and hope, Sarah and Daniel set off to meet the children who would change their lives forever. The road ahead was uncertain, but Sarah was determined to offer her love, to be the mother she had always dreamed of being, even if it meant stepping into a life that was far from what she had ever imagined. The days following Sarah's phone call with the adoption agency felt like a whirlwind. As she and Daniel made plans to meet the 3 siblings, a mixture of excitement and nervousness filled their home. It wasn't every day that someone was given the chance to welcome children into their lives, especially in such an unexpected and urgent way. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the children, 2 boys and a girl. She imagined what they might look like, what their personalities could be like, and what their lives had been like before they lost their parents. She knew they were facing a difficult journey, but she was determined to offer them the love and stability they so desperately needed. Daniel, too, felt a sense of urgency. He had always wanted children, and while he had envisioned raising a family in a more traditional sense, he knew that life had a way of throwing curveballs. The moment he heard about the siblings, he realized that this might be their chance. They may not have expected to become parents in this way, but if they were going to help these children heal, it would take all of their love and dedication. The adoption agency had informed them that the children had just lost their parents in a car accident. The news was heartbreaking. Sarah couldn't imagine the pain these children were going through. Losing their parents at such a young age was a trauma she could never fully understand. She wondered how they would react when they met her and Daniel, and if they would be able to trust them. Would they even want to be part of a new family? The first meeting was scheduled for a few days later. Sarah and Daniel nervously prepared themselves, making sure they had everything ready. Extra clothes in the car, a few toys in case the children wanted to play, and snacks to make the meeting feel less formal. They knew it would be a difficult first encounter, but they wanted to make it as comfortable as possible. Sarah spent hours thinking about what to say, what to do. She wanted to help the children feel safe, but she also understood that they might not be ready for a new family. It was a lot to ask of them, and she was afraid they might not accept her as their new mother. When the day finally arrived, Sarah dressed in something simple yet comforting, something that would show she wasn't trying to be too formal or distant. She wanted the children to see her as someone who would be there for them, someone who cared, someone who wouldn't try to replace their parents but would offer them the support and love they needed. Arriving at the shelter where the children were staying, Sarah and Daniel were greeted by a social worker who had been assigned to help the children through their transition. The social worker explained that the children were still grieving, and understandably they might be closed off or upset. She had prepared them for the meeting, but there was no telling how they would react. She led Sarah and Daniel into a room where the 3 siblings were waiting. The children were sitting together on a couch, looking small and fragile. The girl, about 7 years old, sat quietly in the middle, her head slightly lowered, her arms crossed over her chest. The boys, one about 4 years old and the other around 6, were sitting next to her. They all looked at Sarah and Daniel with wide, cautious eyes. Sarah's heart ached when she saw them. They looked so lost, so fragile, as if the weight of their grief was too heavy to carry. She could feel their fear, their confusion, and it broke her heart. "Hello," Sarah said softly, her voice gentle and calm. She smiled at them, trying to convey warmth without overwhelming them. "My name is Sarah, and this is my husband, Daniel. We're here because we would like to get to know you." The children didn't respond at first. Sarah noticed the way they avoided eye contact, the way they seemed to shrink back from her words. She understood. They had just lost their parents, and now here were these strangers, Sarah and Daniel, who were offering them a new life. But in their eyes, Sarah saw fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being let down, fear of losing even more. Sarah knelt down to be at eye level with the children. She didn't want to make them feel small or inferior. She wanted them to see her as someone who would listen, someone they could trust, if only a little. "We don't want to replace your parents," Sarah said gently, choosing her words carefully. "We just want to be here for you, to help you in whatever way you need. If you want, you can call me Mama, but only if that feels right for you. I'm here to help you no matter what." At that moment, the room fell silent. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the children. She could see the way the girl hesitated, the way the boys shifted in their seats, their little faces full of emotions they didn't know how to express. Sarah's mind raced, wondering if they would ever accept her, if they would ever let her in. After a long, tense pause, the girl slowly looked up at Sarah. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and uncertainty, but there was something else there, something faint but hopeful. She didn't speak at first, but her gaze softened just a little. Sarah held her breath, waiting for any sign that she might have said something that reached the child. Then the older boy, the 6-year-old, looked at Sarah and said quietly, "Mama." Sarah's heart melted at the sound of that word coming from his lips. It was hesitant, unsure, but it was there. It was a tiny step, a glimmer of trust, and for Sarah it was the beginning of something beautiful. She smiled, her heart full of warmth, and nodded gently. "If you'd like to call me Mama, you can," Sarah said, her voice full of tenderness. "You can take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel stood beside her, a reassuring presence, and the room felt a little less heavy. The children didn't say much more, but their small gestures spoke volumes. The girl shifted a little closer to her brothers, and the younger boy reached out his hand to Sarah, his eyes filled with curiosity. It was a small gesture, but it was the beginning of something real. As the meeting continued, Sarah and Daniel spent time with the children, playing games, offering them snacks, and just talking to them. It was clear that the children were still processing their grief, but little by little they began to open up. The walls they had built around themselves started to come down, and the possibility of a new life, a new family, began to feel more real. It wasn't going to be easy, Sarah knew that, but she was determined to give these children a loving home. When the meeting came to an end, Sarah and Daniel said their goodbyes, promising the children that they would see them again soon. As they left the shelter, Sarah felt a sense of hope rising inside her. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be many challenges, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like the dream she had always had of becoming a mother was within reach. It wouldn't happen overnight, but the seeds of a new family had been planted. As Sarah and Daniel drove home that day, they both silently reflected on the meeting. They knew it was just the beginning, but they also knew that they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had seen the spark of trust in the children's eyes, and that was enough to give them hope. Their journey as a family was just beginning, and though they had no idea what the future would hold, they were ready to embrace it with all their hearts. The first few weeks after Sarah and Daniel brought the children into their home were a blur of emotions, adjustments, and unexpected challenges. Sarah had spent years dreaming about this moment, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the reality of becoming a mother to 3 children who had experienced so much pain and loss. Each day brought something new, moments of joy, moments of frustration, and moments when Sarah wondered if she was truly ready for what had come into her life. The children's grief was palpable. The girl, Emma, who was 7, often found herself staring out the window, her face a mixture of sadness and confusion. She was quiet most of the time, only speaking when spoken to, and even then her words were often tinged with fear. She had lost her parents, her world had been torn apart, and now here she was in a strange house with strange people, trying to make sense of it all. It was hard for Sarah to see Emma in such a fragile state, and she knew that building trust would take time. The walls Emma had built around her heart were thick and strong, and Sarah could feel the weight of that every time she tried to reach out to her. James, the older of the 2 boys, was 6. He was a little more open than his sister, but his behavior often vacillated between sadness and anger. There were times when he would lash out, Sometimes it's Sarah, sometimes it is younger brother, Jack. He had trouble understanding why his parents were gone, and the idea of being asked to accept new parents, even with all the love Sarah and Daniel had to offer, felt like an impossible task for him. He often would shut down in the middle of conversations, his little face set in a frown, his eyes filled with confusion. Jack, the youngest at 4 years old, seemed the most affected by the upheaval in his life. He missed his parents terribly but didn't always know how to express it. His outbursts, though rare, were heartbreaking. He would cry uncontrollably at night, calling for his mother and father. In those moments, Sarah's heart would ache for him. She wished she could take away his pain, but she knew that healing was a process, one that couldn't be rushed. It would take time, love, and a great deal of patience. The first night they spent together as a family was filled with anxiety. Sarah and Daniel had prepared the children's new rooms with care, making sure they felt safe and comfortable. The rooms were cozy with stuffed animals, soft blankets, and pictures on the walls. Still, when bedtime came, Sarah could sense the nervousness in the air. Emma had curled up tightly in her bed, her eyes wide open as she stared at the ceiling. James had kicked the covers off and was fidgeting, unable to settle down. Jack had climbed into bed with Sarah and Daniel, asking to sleep in their room. It took several hours for Sarah to gently guide him back to his own bed, reassuring him that he was safe. The silence in the house that night felt heavier than it had ever been before. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustling of the trees outside, the occasional creak of the house settling. But more than anything, she heard the quiet sobs of Jack in the other room. Her heart broke for him. She wanted to run to him, to hold him and tell him everything would be okay. But she knew he needed to learn to trust that he was safe in his own bed. It was a painful lesson, but one that he had to learn. Over the next few weeks, there were small victories, moments that made Sarah believe they were on the right path. James started calling her Mama more often, though it was still said with some hesitation. Emma began to speak more, especially when it came to her favorite books. Jack, though still struggling with bedtime, had moments where he would crawl into Sarah's lap and fall asleep there, his small body curling up into hers as if he had found a place of safety. But just as there were moments of progress, there were also setbacks. Emma had nightmares that left her waking up in the middle of the night, screaming for her parents. James would get frustrated and refuse to listen, pushing Sarah away when she tried to comfort him. Jack, though he had his moments of closeness, often seemed distant, like he didn't fully trust anyone. Sarah would lie awake wondering if she was doing the right thing, wondering if they were really making a difference in the children's lives, or if they were simply a temporary comfort in a world that had been turned upside down. The hardest part was seeing how the children would sometimes look at Sarah and Daniel with longing, as if they were waiting for something more, waiting for their real parents to come back. The sense of loss in their eyes was a constant reminder of what they had gone through, and Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of it. She wanted so badly to take away their pain, to fill the hole that had been left in their hearts, but she knew that wasn't something she could do overnight. Healing would take time, and she would need to be patient. As hard as it was, one afternoon while they were all sitting around the kitchen table, Sarah decided to do something simple, something to help the children feel more at ease in their new home. She pulled out some drawing supplies and asked if anyone wanted to draw. Emma hesitated at first, but then grabbed a piece of paper and began drawing. James followed suit, his picture a chaotic mess of scribbles, but Sarah could see that he was concentrating on it with all his might. Jack, as always, wanted to draw with Sarah, so she sat beside him and helped him draw a picture of a tree. It was a quiet moment, but one that spoke volumes. Emma's drawing was of a house with a sun shining above it and a garden full of flowers. James's picture, while a mess of colors and lines, showed a strange sense of creativity. Jack's tree, though a bit rough around the edges, was a symbol of growth, of something new taking root in their lives. As Sarah looked at the pictures, she realized something important. The children were starting to open up. They weren't fully healed yet, not by a long shot, but they were beginning to trust her, beginning to see her as a figure of comfort and love. There was still so much more work to be done, but Sarah knew that they had taken the first steps toward healing. The journey was long and it would be filled with both challenges and small victories, but she was determined to stick with it. For the first time in what felt like a long time, Sarah felt hope rising within her. She knew that this was only the beginning, but she also knew that with time, love, and patience they could make this new family work. She wasn't sure how long it would take for the children to fully heal, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had already promised them that she would be there for them no matter what, and that promise was one she intended to keep. The journey of creating a family was never going to be easy for Sarah and Daniel, but as the weeks turned into months, they began to realize something important. Love wasn't something you could rush, nor could it be forced. It was a slow, steady process, like planting a seed and patiently waiting for it to grow. Every day they put in the work, offering their love, understanding, and support to Emma, James, and Jack. And with each small step, they saw a little more of the children's personalities shining through. At first, Sarah had been afraid of doing things wrong. She worried that if she didn't get everything just right, she might lose the fragile trust the children had started to build in her. But over time, she learned to trust herself more, realizing that love wasn't about perfection. It was about being there consistently, even when things were hard. She and Daniel learned to navigate the ups and downs of parenting with compassion, reminding themselves that they were in this for the long haul. Sarah had always envisioned herself as a mother, but being a mother to 3 children with such complex emotional needs was something she had never imagined. Emma, James, and Jack had been through so much, and every day was a new challenge. There were moments of joy, when the kids laughed when they had their first school play, when they made new friends. But there were also moments of struggle, moments where Sarah and Daniel had to dig deep to understand the pain the children were still carrying. One of the first breakthroughs came with Emma. Sarah had noticed that Emma was beginning to talk a little more, though her words were often hesitant, as though she was testing the waters to see if it was safe to open up. Emma loved to draw, and every time she picked up a crayon, Sarah couldn't help but feel like it was a glimpse into Emma's inner world. One afternoon, Emma handed Sarah a drawing she had made. This time it was a picture of Sarah and the 3 children all holding hands. Emma's quiet way of expressing her feelings spoke volumes. It was as though she was finally starting to see Sarah as someone who could be trusted, someone who would be there for her. At the dinner table that evening, Sarah looked at the drawing in her hands and felt a sense of pride. She wasn't the perfect mother, far from it, but she was the mother Emma needed. She was starting to understand how powerful small gestures of love could be. "Thank you, Emma," Sarah said softly, smiling at the girl. "I love your picture. It means a lot to me." Emma gave her a small, shy smile in return. It was a tiny step, but for Sarah it was a huge victory. She realized that trust wasn't something that would happen overnight. It took time, but each moment of connection, no matter how small, was a step toward healing. James, on the other hand, was still struggling with his emotions. His anger would often bubble to the surface, and there were times when he would lash out at Sarah or Daniel, pushing them away when they tried to help. Sarah understood that James was confused and angry, but sometimes it was hard to know how to help him. She never took his anger personally, even when it felt like a sharp jab to her heart. She knew that James was hurting, and his anger was simply a way of protecting himself. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, James came into the living room where Sarah was sitting. His eyes were red from crying, and there was a look of frustration on his face. Sarah had seen this look before, and she knew he was trying to process everything. He sat down next to her, but there was still a distance between them. "I miss my mom and dad," James said quietly, his voice trembling. Sarah nodded, her heart aching. "I know you do, James. I miss them too. But I'm here for you. I want to help you if you'll let me." James didn't respond right away, but after a long pause, he rested his head on her shoulder. Sarah wrapped her arm around him, pulling him into a gentle hug. She didn't try to force him to talk, but simply let him know she was there, that she would be there for him no matter what. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over time, James began to open up more. He would talk to Sarah about his memories of his parents, and they would share quiet moments together. There were still times when his anger resurfaced, but each time, Sarah patiently reassured him that it was okay to feel angry, sad, and confused. Little by little, James learned to trust Sarah more, though there were still many days when it felt like a battle. Jack, the youngest, was a whirlwind of energy and emotion. He was quick to smile and laugh, but his sensitivity often caught Sarah off guard. He would have moments of sudden tears, especially when he saw something that reminded him of his parents, like a toy they had used to play with or a photo of them. Jack missed his parents deeply, and though he was younger than his siblings, his grief was just as intense. One afternoon, Sarah sat on the couch with Jack, holding him in her lap as they watched a cartoon together. Jack had a way of curling into her like he was trying to soak up all the warmth and comfort she could offer. She loved how he would rest his head on her shoulder and wrap his little arms around her. But she also knew that deep down, Jack was struggling with his own loss. "Do you miss your mom and dad, Jack?" Sarah asked softly, her heart breaking as she stroked his hair. Jack nodded, his voice small. "I want them back," he whispered. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. "I wish I could make them come back, but I promise you, I'm here for you. I'll always be here to take care of you." Jack looked up at her, his big brown eyes searching her face. For a moment there was silence, as if he was trying to understand her words. Finally he said, "You're my mama, right?" Sarah's heart swelled with love. "Yes, Jack, I'm your mama." Jack smiled, a small but meaningful smile. It was a simple moment, but for Sarah it felt like a victory. Jack was starting to accept her, to see her as the mother figure he so desperately needed. Over time, the children began to settle into their new lives. There were still difficult days, of course. Days when the grief would overwhelm them, days when they would pull away or lash out. But there were also moments of joy, moments when they laughed together, when they shared stories about their day, when they hugged Sarah and Daniel as if they truly believed they were home. As the months passed, Sarah began to feel more and more like a mother. The children were still healing, but they were growing, and with each passing day she could see the difference. They were learning to trust again, to love again. They were becoming a family. For Sarah and Daniel, the road ahead was still uncertain, but they were committed to it. They knew that this journey would have its challenges, but it was a journey worth taking. Every step they took, no matter how small, was a step toward healing, a step toward building the family they had always dreamed of. And though the road was long, Sarah had faith. She had seen the children's growth, and she knew that with time, their love would only grow stronger. Together as a family, they would heal. Together, they would build a future filled with love, joy, and hope. As the months passed, Sarah and Daniel began to see more and more of the children's personalities shining through. Their bond, though still fragile, had become stronger. Emma, James, and Jack had become more than just the children Sarah and Daniel had opened their hearts to. They had become their family. While they still had their moments of sadness and anger, the warmth of love and understanding in their home was undeniable. It was the kind of love that had to be earned, and Sarah and Daniel had worked tirelessly for it. Every day, there was a new small victory. Emma's laughter as she told her first joke, James sharing a story from school, and Jack's tiny hugs after a long day. Sarah and Daniel had begun to feel like parents in every sense of the word, not just in the way they cared for the children, but in the way the children began to care for them in return. It was not just the act of nurturing, but a mutual love that was growing steadily. The road hadn't been easy, and it never would be. Sarah still remembered the tears and frustrations of those first few weeks, nights when the house was filled with the sounds of grief and confusion. It had been difficult for all of them. Sometimes she would lie awake at night, wondering if they were doing enough. The children had suffered a great loss, and their healing was a slow process. But as Sarah looked at them now, sitting at the kitchen table laughing, chatting, and sharing little moments together, she realized how far they had come. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Sarah felt a sense of contentment wash over her. They were all together, and for the first time in a long while the house felt like a true home. The children were not just guests in her life, they were part of it. They had become her children, and she was proud of the family they had built together. Emma was telling a story about something that had happened at school, her voice filled with excitement as she described her new friends and the activities she had enjoyed. Sarah smiled as she listened. She had seen Emma grow from the shy, quiet girl who had withdrawn into herself to the confident, open young girl who was beginning to find her place in the world. Though Emma still had moments of sadness, she was learning to navigate her emotions, and Sarah had witnessed that transformation with so much love and pride. James was sitting next to her. His face lit up with a mischievous grin as he made silly faces at Jack, who giggled uncontrollably. It was moments like this that made Sarah's heart swell with happiness. James had always been the most difficult to reach, his anger often getting in the way of connecting with him. But now he was beginning to open up more. He no longer pulled away as much, and though he still had moments of frustration, his walls were coming down. He was starting to trust again. Trusting Sarah, trusting Daniel, and trusting the love that surrounded him. Jack, who had once been the most vulnerable, had grown into a bright, energetic little boy. He still missed his parents deeply, but his attachment to Sarah and Daniel had deepened, and his trust in them was growing stronger. He no longer cried every night asking for his mother and father. Instead, he had found comfort in their arms, and he had come to see Sarah as his mama with a heart full of love. At bedtime, he would curl up with Sarah and Daniel, asking for a story before drifting off to sleep, his small hand clutching Sarah's. The boy who once refused to sleep in his own room now had a sense of security he had never known before. As the months turned into a year, the changes in the children were even more evident. Emma had become a budding artist, filling her room with colorful drawings, many of which were of her new family. She had even begun to take pride in the new home they had made together, decorating her space with pictures of the people who now surrounded her. Though her sadness hadn't completely disappeared, her sense of hope had grown stronger with each passing day. James had made friends at school and was starting to engage more with his peers. He had also joined a local soccer team, something he had always wanted to do but had never had the chance before. Watching him run around on the field with a big smile on his face, Sarah felt a sense of pride she had never expected to experience. James was finding his own way, carving out his own path in a world that had once felt so uncertain. Jack, who had always been a little ball of energy, had become a little adventurer. He would spend hours outside exploring the garden, climbing trees and running through the yard. He had developed a strong bond with Daniel, following him around like a shadow as they worked on projects together in the garage or tinkered with tools. Jack's love for adventure and discovery was something Sarah cherished deeply, knowing that the boy who had once been so afraid of the world was now embracing it with open arms. The holidays that year had been especially meaningful. Sarah and Daniel had worked hard to make Christmas a special occasion for the children. There were decorations everywhere, from the tree in the living room to the little stockings hung by the fireplace. It was their first Christmas together as a family, and Sarah had poured all of her energy into making it a warm, joyous occasion. She watched as Emma, James, and Jack opened their presents, their faces lighting up with excitement. And when they all sat around the dinner table, sharing a meal as a family, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. During that holiday season, Sarah found herself reflecting on how far they had come. They had built something beautiful together, something that had begun with so much uncertainty. The road had been long and there had been moments of doubt, but now as she looked at her children, her real children, she knew it had all been worth it. They had found healing in each other's arms, and the love that had started as a seed was now a strong, flourishing tree. There were still challenges ahead, of course. No family was without its struggles. There would always be moments of frustration, moments when the scars of the past threatened to resurface. But Sarah was no longer afraid. She had learned that love wasn't just about the good times. It was about sticking together through the hard times. And with Daniel by her side and the children's trust slowly growing stronger, she felt confident in their future. On the day of Emma's school recital, when she stood proudly on stage, her eyes scanning the audience for her family, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Emma's face lit up as she saw her parents cheering her on, and for the first time Sarah saw something else in her daughter's eyes. Pride, not just in herself, but in her family. And when Emma sang her final note, Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. She knew that this moment was one of many to come. As Sarah watched her children continue to grow, she knew that she had found what she had always dreamed of. They were a family, one that had been built on love, patience, and perseverance. No, their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. The pain of the past had shaped them, but it had not defined them. Together, they had created a new beginning, and for the first time, Sarah truly believed that they had a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities.